Hi friends, welcome back to 100 Blocks in 2025. Today we're going to use our stitch and flip flying goose method that we learned last time, but we're going to do it with a little bit of a focal print. So today I'm going to make block number 41 in Tula's book on page 96. And let's kind of take a look at the drawing because we can see what the block's going to look like after, but let's take a look at the drawing. So what we're going to need for this is a print, 3.5 by 5 inch print right here and right here. At the bottom and the top of those prints, so right here, we're going to need a couple of triangles. They're going to be the same fabric as we have in our goose. Remember, our goose is the center and our sky are the little points on the outside. So in order to make this arrow, we need 2 squares, which we're going to use our stitch and flip method on, that are the same fabric as the goose. And then we're going to need a goose fabric rectangle, and then we're going to need 2 squares that are sky, and we're going to need that for both sides of the block. So let me show you what we're doing. So it's so much easier to see what we're doing with the drawing itself. So here is my print, my little coffee print that I'm going to use. And then my goose fabric is going to be this sort of cherry red pink fabric. So the first thing I'm going to need is I need a 3.5 by 5.5 inch rectangle on both sides of this block. I also need a goose fabric, and that fabric's going to be a 3.5 inch by 2 inch rectangle, and I'm going to need 2 of those, one for each side of the block. Then I'm going to need for each side of the block 2 squares, so 4 total of 2 inch squares in the same color as the goose fabric, and I'm going to need 4 2-inch squares that are our sky fabric, and we're going to use this pink for our sky fabric. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take all of our little 2-inch squares and we're going to draw that diagonal line down the back, okay? So that we know exactly where our sewing line is going to be. We're not going to sew on either side of it. We're going to use that as our sewing line. And we're going to add those two squares to the top of this side and the bottom of this side rectangle to make these points that are here in the drawing. And then we're going to add our sky fabric in the same fashion to our flying goose, okay? So let's come back, I'll show you what that looks like. So here's our block. This is what it's supposed to look like. So you can see I have my print here with my 2 little triangles at the top, and then I made my little flying goose block, and I'm going to do the same thing opposite on the bottom. So I cut the prints in such a way that I would be able to see them fussy cut when I put the block together. Okay, so now we're just going to sew them together like a little 4-patch, top onto here, bottom onto there, and then sew the whole thing together, right? Couple little things to note. Again, I'm going to check and make sure everything's going in the right direction before I trim out the background out from behind these points. Same thing on here. We just want to make sure it's nice and even, and make sure we have our 1/4 inch seam at the top in our overlap. And then I'll just note to you right here, this little side right here that looks all chunky, that was cut with a pinking shear because this was a little fabric sample. So it's fine, but it looks a little bit uneven, so I just wanted to address it. So let's sew it together. We'll come back and see what it looks like. I hope you had fun with your little geese. They were a little smaller than we did last time, but this is our example. And this is our finished block. Look how cute that is with the little coffee print. So a couple of things to note, you know, again, you got to watch for your 1/4 inch points. You are going to have this weird little angle here, right? Because that little angle right there where my finger is, that's going to go in the seam allowance of the next block. But you can see how it cuts right off when you put the seam together. I did open up the seam on the back just to let it, you know, that center seam just to kind of help with these points a little bit and reducing a little bit of the bulk with the block. And because this is a smaller stitch and flip flying geese unit, take your time. Make sure that your seam from point to point is even. Draw a line if you have to and follow it. Okay, but give it a try and practice. It doesn't really matter how big they are. They'll come out even if you just take your time. Don't try to rush it. All right, and make a bunch. Keep practicing, and catch me on the web at cabinquilters.com.